Clock has hit 12:01, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here with our introduction. Thanks for all of you introducing yourselves in the chat. Looks like we got a good collection of people throughout the state so far. Thank you all for joining us again today for another CDAC Energy Codes webinar. Today we will be talking about the Illinois Energy Efficient Buildings Act, as well as Illinois Public School Building Codes. Uh, and I want to remind everyone today that this webinar is being recorded. And please, if you have questions, use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen. You can put questions in the chat, but the Q&A feature is a little bit easier for us to notice and make sure that we won't miss any of those questions. So please try to use that Q&A feature if you do have questions during the presentation. All right, your presenters today are myself, Robert Schlorf, and my colleague Ryan Siegel. The learning objectives for today's webinar. At the end of this presentation, attendees should be able to differentiate between applicable health, life, safety, and other building codes for public schools and other buildings in Illinois. You should be able to explain the timeline for adopting an updated Illinois Energy Conservation Code. You should be able to identify which code version a project needs to follow, and should be able to explain the differences in roof insulation requirements between the different codes and how these differences can impact energy consumption and pollution generation. Who we are CDAC, the Smart Energy Design Assistance Center. We are an applied research group at the University of Illinois. Our mission is to reduce the energy footprint of Illinois and beyond. What we do, we assist buildings and communities in achieving energy efficiency, saving money, and becoming more sustainable. We do this through a variety of work, including on-site energy assessments, energy code training, such as today's webinar, as well as in-person trainings and other resources that we host on our website. CDAC is the Illinois Energy Conservation Training provider. This training program is sponsored by the Illinois State Energy Office. CDAC is an ICC preferred education provider, and this course is approved for both ICC and AIA continued education credits. If you've provided your ICC or AIA information at registration, we will submit certificates of completion on your behalf. And if you did not submit that information at registration and you'd like to, you can send us your ICC or AIA information by email as well. CDAC's Energy Code Training program offers technical support as well as online resources. If you'd like to reach our hotline with any code technical questions, feel free to email us at energycode@illinois.edu or call our 800 number listed on the screen. We do often prefer emails. It's the easiest way for us to pass questions amongst the team here at the office to make sure that we can get you the best written response possible, and then you can take that written response and distribute it to whatever parties need the information. So we do often recommend emails. However, if you have a quick question or you simply want to talk something through, our phone line is always available. We do have a number of online resources available at our website, smartenergy.illinois.edu/energy code. These include workshops, our previous in-person workshops. The presentation slides for those presentations are uploaded onto our website. We also have our previous webinars, recordings of those previous webinars, as well as the slides available on our website to review. We also have online on-demand training modules covering a variety of topics, code-related topics such as the Chicago Energy Transformation Code, building electrification, the updates from the 2018 to the 2021 IECC, and other topics as well. Those courses are self-paced and free to register online. You just need to sign up for a free student account, and then you can take those on-demand self-paced training courses and receive continued education at the end of completing the course and completing a quiz. We also have other online resources on our Energy Code site, including Energy Code Smart Tips, which are a couple page documents that cover specific issues within code or specific topics. CDAC's Energy Code Training Series for this program year, we've just started. We have one archive presentation so far this program year, and that was the commercial blower door testing presentation. With the update to the new state energy code within Illinois, all new commercial buildings and additions must be pressure tested. If you want to see more details about that, please visit our archived presentation on that. And if you have questions, reach out to us. Today, we'll be covering the Energy Efficient Buildings Act and public school building codes, as I said earlier. And then there's a list of some of our upcoming webinars, including some on code basics, some on the Illinois stretch code, how communities interact with the code, and eventually following up with a 2024 IECC overview. Registration for these webinars, please visit our website to register. We'll talk more about the adoption process for the updated energy codes in Illinois in the next section. However, the 2021 IECC is the current energy code with Illinois amendments. Any projects applying for a permit on or after January 1st of 2024 will need to comply with this new code. Ryan will touch more on the adoption process in just a little bit. How do you access the code? One of the best ways to access the code, including the Illinois Energy Conservation Code, so the 2021 IECC with all of the Illinois amendments, you can access that code online using ICC's website. This is the way that we in the office most often access the code. It's easy to get in, easy to navigate. You can see there's a table of contents there along the left-hand side that really guides you through the code very easily. It's very easy to find what sections you're looking for. So we often find this to be the best way to access the codes, be it the International Energy Conservation Code or the Illinois code. The City of Chicago has their own energy code, which became effective November 1st of 2022. This is the 2022 Chicago Energy Transformation Code. We will not be focusing primarily on this today, but it will be brought up. To access the Chicago Energy Transformation Code, you can also go to the ICC Safe or to the iccsafe.org site, where they have it available there as well, same format as the Illinois code and the IECC. So again, there's that table of contents on the left-hand side that really makes it easy to navigate. All right, before we head into our first section here on the Illinois Energy Efficient Building Act, I'm going to launch our first poll question for you all. So our first poll question is, do you work on school projects within the state of Illinois? Your options are yes, sometimes among other types of projects, or no. And then the second question there is, do you work on school projects within the city of Chicago? Same options, yes, sometimes among other types of work, or no. And just a couple more minutes there. Looks like we've got a few more answers coming in. All right, we'll go ahead and end it. So it looks like the majority of you do work on school projects within the state of Illinois, and then most of you do not work on school projects within the city of Chicago. So it's good for us to know moving forward. I'm going to go ahead and hand the presentation off to my colleague Ryan to take us through the Energy Efficient Building Act.
Well, thank you, Robert. So Illinois has what's called the Illinois Energy Efficient Buildings Act. This is where this is the act that has required private buildings to comply with the Illinois Energy Conservation Code. As Robert mentioned, this is based on the International Energy Conservation Code with a handful of amendments. Something that people may notice here was the original act was effective at the end of August of 2009. So I want to wish everyone a happy 15th birthday of the Energy Efficient Building Act. And so Illinois did begin some of this ahead of that time, focusing on their own buildings, but beginning back in 2009 is when it took effect for private sector, both residential and commercial. So a few things to understand about it is for commercial buildings, it sets the minimum requirements for new construction additions and renovations. So, focusing in on that key there, the minimum for commercial buildings, whereas in the residential buildings, it is a minimum and maximum for new construction. So cities and jurisdictions, while they can they can adopt their own energy codes and their own energy standards for the residential buildings that must meet the state minimum, the state requirements for that. Commercial buildings, local jurisdictions do have the ability to go above and beyond this minimum standard. So you can have commercial buildings, so a local jurisdiction could adopt an amendment that requires something above and beyond the state standard for commercial, whereas on residential, it is strictly it must be that. So you can't go above or below the standard for residential. Now, projects themselves are welcome to go above the standard, but the local jurisdiction cannot enforce requirements above that.
Sorry, Ryan.
So, yep. So part of this is developed through the Illinois EPA support and the Capital Development Board. They are in charge of developing the energy codes for that. So what this is how that they take the baseline of the International Energy Conservation Codes, and then based on the state of Illinois amendments and determinations, they develop what the Illinois code will be. So it's providing some additional amendments above and beyond the international code. And so they will publish a small little packet of those amendments that can be used in conjunction with the International Energy Conservation Code, or in this cycle, the state of Illinois has published a consolidated document. So that has the language of the international with the Illinois amendments already built in. So that is very helpful for that. So there are a few jurisdictions that do have the ability to adopt higher requirements than the state for residential. So part of this, we do have a map here. And so municipalities with over 1 million population, so City of Chicago, they're allowed to go above and above the minimum. Municipalities who who adopt the stretch energy code can adopt further strengthening amendments above and beyond that. So if your jurisdiction may be interested or considering adopting the stretch energy code, that may be an ability, if they are interested in going above and beyond the state minimum, to adopt that stretch code, and they could adopt some further strengthening amendments above and beyond that. So if people do have questions about that, they can feel free to reach out to our office, and we can help with questions regarding that stretch energy code coming up. And the other jurisdictions are units of local government or home rule units that had adopted an energy code that was at least as stringent as the 2006 International Energy Conservation Code before May 15th, 2009. So there's about 64 out of approximately 1,400 communities across the state of Illinois. So there's not a whole lot of jurisdictions that this applies to, but you can see those here on a map. So there are 4 counties along with several local municipalities that had adopted that. So this is one area where, because Illinois is a home rule state or known as a home rule state, so this either happens by achieving a population of over 25,000, or jurisdictions can pass a referendum to become a home rule unit. So this being home rule provides additional flexibility for determining policies and local regulations, much more than just the state laws. And typically these communities do have much more with that flexibility. Most or many laws by the state of Illinois do not automatically apply to home rule communities. The Energy Efficient Building Act is one of the few exceptions to this, where it even calls out directly in the act that this is a unique feature of the Energy Efficient Building Act, in that this overrides home rule, so that even home rule communities, such as many communities across Illinois that have a population over 25,000, they are still subject to the Energy Efficient Building Act and the Illinois Energy Efficiency Code. So, touching a little bit on how this works, how the process goes through. Obviously, we're beginning with the publication of the International Energy Conservation Code. That kind of starts the clock on this. So the Energy Efficient Building Act calls out that the Capital Development Board shall review and adopt the International Energy Conservation Code with state-specific amendments within 1 year of its publication. And then the code needs to take effect within 6 months of that adoption date. So we're calling out here that there is no grace period after that. That has been a little bit of a question, this recognizing that this last code cycle, the time period between adoption and the effective date was approximately 6 weeks, which is under the 6-month limit set by statute. And this is kind of where our second note here comes in that adoption can be less than 1 year, and the effective date can be less than 6 months after adoption. They do try to work these dates such that they are recognizing the construction cycle and trying not to put the effective date in the middle of high construction season. So this last year, as Robert pointed out, the effective date was set at January 1st of 2024. That provided a fairly clean differentiation between which code version we are on by having that January 1st date of that. So part of this is understanding where is the Energy Efficient Building Code applicable. And so units of local government that don't have any energy efficiency standards aren't required to adopt and enforce that code. So, but if you do adopt any energy efficiency building standards, they do need to be compliant with the Energy Efficient Buildings Act. So, as mentioned earlier, means for those standards need to be at least as stringent as the state standard. And for commercial buildings, regardless of municipality, they can be more stringent. And if you are wanting more stringent on the residential side, you either have to have been one of those select communities that were early adopters of an energy efficient code, or be adopting the stretch energy code that will be available for adoption and enforcement beginning of October next month. So we do have a couple of presentations coming up on that. As part of the adoption for that, or for the Illinois Energy Conservation Code, does set forth a process for that adoption of the Illinois amendments. And part of that is the Capital Development Board has a committee that has been put together, the Illinois Energy Conservation Code Advisory Committee, also known as ILLICAC. And they seek input from the building trades and design and construction professionals, along with any other interested parties from the public. And there are many different groups that have representatives on this, including building trades, design professionals, code administrators, as noted here as well, environmental justice groups, environmental advocacy groups as well. And so this is a fairly broad committee trying to understand the different facets of the building construction and trades for that. Capital Development Board does accept applications to serve on this committee periodically as vacancies become available. Also, as Robert briefly mentioned, the 2024 International Energy Conservation Code has been released and published, and the Capital Development Board is now taking amendment proposals. So that is, if you are interested in providing a proposal for an amendment to the 2024 IECC for the upcoming adoption of that by the state of Illinois in the next year, do go ahead and submit those. Those are due by the end of 2024. So how the Energy Efficient Building Act applies in the state of Illinois, it applies to new buildings for which you provide a building permit application, along with all state-funded facilities. So this is both commercial and residential. Industrial buildings are also considered commercial by the code. So even here, where you might have some heated and cooled warehouse distribution buildings, those are typically considered industrial buildings, but those are considered commercial for the purposes of the code. How the code works is it defines what makes a residential building, and then commercial buildings are all other buildings for that. So there are a few exceptions to the Energy Efficient Building Act. This includes things such as those otherwise exempt from provisions of locally adopted codes. So sometimes this may be an ag-related building, as some jurisdictions exempt those from the local building codes because there is no ability to collect a fee, or they are prohibited from collecting a fee for permit applications for those. So some jurisdictions have decided they will not enforce a locally adopted building code for those. Other jurisdictions have decided that they would go ahead and adopt and enforce the building codes to those agriculture buildings, but just not collect any permit fees for that. So another here would be buildings not containing comfort conditioned space. So we have an illustration here at the top left. So these are commonly found around the state of Illinois. There are many buildings of this type that might be examples of those that don't have comfort conditioning in them. Their conditioning is built for a specific purpose. So there may be requirements if you say that the conditioning equipment that you install is not for comfort conditioning. The jurisdiction may ask for some additional documentation of that. So one occurrence of this is for a bathroom house at a park, where they say, well, all I'm providing is conditioning just to keep the pipes from freezing, so freeze protection only. The local jurisdiction may say you need to provide some documentation about how are you making sure that that is not comfort conditioning. So that could be demonstrated through both thermostat settings, that the thermostat is set at only 40 degrees, along with the heating load calculation to determine how small of a heater is required to provide that freeze protection. So those could be some examples of that. Also, buildings, so I know either buildings that don't have any conditioning or buildings without comfort conditioning. The Act calls out that if you have 100 amp electrical service, comfort conditioning is assumed unless you demonstrate otherwise, unless the code official determines that it's for other purposes and not comfort conditioning. Also, Illinois has a fairly broad exception for historic buildings. However, in order to receive that exception from the Illinois Energy Conservation Code, they need to be listed on the national or state register, or designated historically significant by the local authorized body. So being that can be fairly broad because if it is exempt from the Illinois Energy Conservation Code through the Energy Efficient Building Act, it's exempt from all provisions, whereas in the International Energy Conservation Code, those historic exemptions are specific to the attributes that make that historic. So it doesn't exempt the entire building. So the Act also lays out that there needs to be code technical assistance provided. So this is provided through the State of Illinois State Energy Office, housed at the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. And several of these, you'll notice, are provided through the Smart Energy Design Assistance Center here at the University of Illinois. So this includes making sure that we are providing training and implementation materials through our webinars, workshops, and online modules, along with our helpline and several other requirements for technical support. So again, we are here to help any projects across the state of Illinois. So be it building owners, design professionals, contractors, and code officials. We are here to support you. Again, our website, smartenergy.illinois.edu/energy-code, and our email address, energycode@illinois.edu. So as far as enforcement, this is one of those that's a little bit unique. The Energy Conservation Code is one of the few codes that are adopted at the state level. Most building codes are adopted and enforced at the local level, but the Energy Code is adopted at the state level, and then it is enforced at the local level. So the local code officials are the ones that deal with the enforcement of this. So part of this, some of the new amendments that have come for the new stretch code is the ability to use certification systems to demonstrate code compliance. City of Chicago has an additional standard that they deem compliant as well. But some of these might be things such as the Passive House Institute certification that can be used to demonstrate compliance. Part of this is because it is a very high performing standard that is focused strictly on energy for that. So touching a little bit on the stretch code, we won't dive too far into this, but understanding that Illinois now has a stretch code that has been developed and has finished going through the administrative rules process and is now available for enforcement beginning October 1st of this year for jurisdictions who wish to adopt this. So a stretch code, this is a little bit unique in that the stretch code is a predictable, it's a much more predictable code than other building codes and other energy codes are. So these have specified predictable minimum performance standards. And you might also notice that this goes back to that 2006 IECC baseline. And part of that is pretty much all of the performance standards use that same 2006. So rather than generating a new baseline for the stretch code, they said, we'll go ahead and continue to use the same baseline as everyone else to hopefully make the learning curve for any building modeling a little bit easier for that. So you see here on this illustration that it moves in a predictable pattern, and we now have the 2032 target for that. So this is where the stretch code development that occurs needs to make sure that they are hitting, that they are meeting or exceeding these targets as far as how much they are going to save over that. It also calls out that renewables do not contribute to this savings. Uh, the purpose of the stretch code is to make sure that we are ending up with a good building first, and then we add our renewables onto it, so that we don't end up with, we can make a greenhouse net zero if we put enough renewables with it, but that's not really the purpose of this. So, additionally, it allows the utility energy efficiency programs to support stretch code compliance. So the utility incentives are based on however much savings there is over and above the state code baseline. So because the stretch code is performing better than that minimum standard of the base code, that improvement can still be incentivized by the utility program. So jurisdictions who choose to adopt the stretch code, that would mean that any new construction in their town might be eligible for their utility incentive programs. So that could be attractive. Next, we're going to go into a poll question before we switch over, change gears now that we've kind of covered the Energy Efficient Buildings Act, before we change gears and go into the Public School Energy Code. All right, and the second poll is, when does the new energy code take effect? Is it at least 6 months after adoption, exactly 6 months after adoption, on the date set by the Capital Development Board as part of the adoption, or when the contractor decides it does? Our second question is, who is in charge of enforcement? Is it the designer, the contractor, the code official, or the building owner? Let's see, we had a question come in regarding if municipalities have adopted building codes without an energy code and does not have any energy performance standard, or are they required to adopt and enforce the energy code? They are not. So again, but if they adopt any energy standard, it needs to be at least as stringent as the state standard.
Go ahead and end the poll here.
All right. So when does the new code take effect? All right, we got almost the majority to say on the date set by CDB as part of adoption. So that is, and as we noted earlier, that date must be within 6 months of adoption. So, and as far as second question, who is in charge of enforcement? Most everyone got this right. It is the code official who is in charge of enforcement. Now, the designer is to design a code compliant building, and the contractor is to build such a building, and the building owner expects a code compliant building, but the code official is the one with the enforcement power.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. I will start taking us through our next section here and talk about public schools, energy codes, and school building codes in general a little bit in the whole state. So we're going to cover a little bit of all of that here. But the main question that we're going to be answering is, what energy code do public school projects within the state need to follow? So before we dig into this, we need to know that there's basically two major documents that I'm going to be talking about within this section. The first document is 105 Illinois Combined Statutes 5, which is the Illinois School Code. This document governs topics such as school district formation combination, the formation of charter schools and the limits on charter schools within the state, the powers and duties that lie with the State Board of Education, the powers and duties that lie with the regional superintendent of schools. The school code also covers funding and financial assistance, as well as other topics, including what building codes schools need to follow, which is presented in section 2 of the school code, which then points you to the second main document that I will be talking about, which is Title 23, Part 180 of the Illinois Administration Code. This document is titled the Health Life Safety Code for Public Schools. Essentially, this document is acting as the building code for public schools within the state of Illinois. And as we'll get into it, this document references requirements that are housed in other places, and I'll talk about where it points to. So, taking another quick look at the Health Life Safety Code, which, as I said, is essentially the building code for the state of Illinois. Um, we've got a screenshot of it up here on the screen. As you can see, it's broken into different subparts. If we take a look at subpart A there very quickly, these are the general provisions within the Health Life Safety Code for public schools. As we can see, that section covers things such as purpose and scope of the code, definitions, responsibilities of the local school board, responsibilities of the regional superintendent, the applicability of the code, variances and waivers. So essentially, we can look at subpart A of this document, the Health Life Safety Code, and equate that to Chapter 1 of the IECC, the International Energy Conservation Code. So those are subpart A. There is some of the charging language that helps us understand how this Health Life Safety Code is meant to be used. So sticking within the Health Life Safety Code, and I'm going to be referencing the school code as well, but I'm going to do my best to make it clear when I reference that document. So the Health Life Safety Code for public schools applies to any school districts that are established under Article 10 of the Illinois School Code, as well as any charter schools that are established under Article 27A of the Illinois School Code. Both of these, both groups of schools, so public schools under Article 10 and charter schools under Article 27A, must apply with Section 180.60 applicability. And that is the section that points to the actual building code requirements that projects need to follow. So we'll get into that here in the next slide, but that's where it points you to the model code requirements that projects will need to follow. Before we get there, Section 180.6 of the Health Life Safety Code amends those applicable model codes in certain topic areas. So requirements for accessibility, plumbing, boiler and pressure vessel safety, elevators, and sprinkler systems. Those requirements are not found in model codes. Instead, the Health Life Safety Code points to previously established Illinois state requirements, so such as the Illinois State Accessibility Code, the Illinois State Plumbing Code. Since those codes and requirements have already been established and have a pretty long history to them, the Health Life Safety Code says rather than going to the model codes, we're going to point you to these established Illinois requirements or codes. It's possible that in the future, the Health Life Safety Code will point to the Illinois Energy Conservation Code as one of these additional codes. These other codes listed here on the screen, such as accessibility and plumbing, have been around a little bit longer than the Illinois Energy Conservation Code. So that's possible that we might see something like that in the future that would actually help to link public school projects with the most current codes used throughout the state. Okay, so compliance with the Health Life Safety Code. So the regional superintendent is basically the one that acts as the code official for public school projects throughout the state. They are the ones responsible for receiving applications for permits, as well as issuing permits for building construction, repair, or renovation on any school buildings within the district. Within their district, the regional superintendent is also responsible for maintaining permit and application records for as long as the school building's in existence, ensuring completion of the required inspections, as well as issuing the general certificate of occupancy. So the regional superintendent is acting much like a local municipal code official would be. Public and charter schools that are not in Chicago, I will cover that here in a little bit, but right now we're talking about public and charter schools that are not in Chicago, must comply with the 2015 suite of model building codes from the International Code Council. So this includes the International Energy Conservation Code, the International the International Existing Building Code, the International Fire Code, International Fuel Gas Code, and the International Property Maintenance Code. There are some certain additional exceptions added to these model codes that can be found within the Health Life Safety Code. However, the Energy Code does not have any exceptions added to it, which means that public and charter schools within the state of Illinois must follow the 2015 International Energy Conservation Code unamended. So the code without any amendments from the state or the school board. If you'd like to take a quick check of what codes do apply, you can always take a look at Appendix A within the Health Life Safety Code. Appendix A provides this table, which gives applicable codes based on the date of the design contract. And as we can see, looking at the bottom row in the furthest right column there, that we are under the 2015 International Code Council, and that's saying that is the whole suite of 2015 model codes. So again, if you ever forget which is the applicable code, you can always turn to Appendix A of the Health Life Safety Code for a reminder. All right, so looking back at Chicago really quickly, and we're going to dip back into the Illinois School Code as well. So Article 34 within the Illinois School Code sets a geographic boundary for school districts and charter schools around municipalities that have populations above 500,000. Within the state of Illinois, the only municipality that this applies to is the city of Chicago. And within the Health Life Safety Code, it says that any charter schools or school districts under Article 34 of the Illinois School Code must comply with local codes. There is an exception there for the fire sprinkler code that is spelled out specific requirements for that, but otherwise, charter schools and public school districts within municipalities with populations over 500,000, so within Chicago, must comply with local codes. The local energy code within Chicago is the Chicago Energy Transformation Code, as I said at the beginning of this presentation. So Chicago public schools and charter schools within the city of Chicago must comply with the Chicago Energy Transformation Code as the local code. Code variance procedures. So unlike the state energy code, there is a process for variances through the Health Life Safety Code for public schools. So there is a waiver and variance process. If during a project there is a requirement or standard that cannot be satisfied for certain reasons, the school board may apply for a waiver waiving that requirement. This must be approved by the Illinois State Board of Education, and what this is going to entail is a survey needs to be completed by a licensed design professional that identifies the problematic requirement, the reasons why it cannot be met, and then that documentation also needs to include how alternative performance is going to be achieved and to document that alternative performance is equal or superior to the code requirement for which the variance has been sought. And then a note here at the bottom is that sprinkler systems cannot receive variances, which if we recall the couple slides ago, sprinkler systems are specifically called out even within the city of Chicago as needing to follow the Health Life Safety Code requirements. So those sprinkler systems cannot receive variances. All right, so who determines school building code updates? All right, so we're going to actually go all the way back into the school code. That's the document up at the top of the slide here. So within the school code, one of the duties of the State Board of Education is to determine the applicable school building code. This is done with advice from the Department of Public Health, the Capital Development Board, and the State Fire Marshal. So it's not just the State Board of Education, but with additional expert advice. The Board of Education has the final say on updates, and there is no mandated update cycle within the school code. Unlike, as Ryan explained, for the state energy code, where there is a mandated update cycle that is linked to the development and release of the latest IECC version, there is no mandated update cycle within the school code. There is a mandatory 10-year survey cycle for schools to address or to survey health, life, safety compliance. And this 10-year cycle can be shortened if deemed necessary by the regional superintendent or the State Board of Education. But that is just a mandated cycle of surveys that does not mandate any updates within the building code cycle itself. Before we move on here, this wraps up our most of our school content. Before we move on, I'm going to launch our next poll question for you all. And your questions are, public school projects within the state of Illinois follow which model energy code without amendments? Is that the 2021 IECC, ASHRAE 90.1, 2019, or the 2024 IECC? And then the second question, who determines school building code updates? Is that the State Board of Education, the Illinois State Governor, Illinois Capital Development Board, or none of the above?
A question came in regarding the move to the 2024 set of building codes. We have been hearing some indications of that, but we have not received or been able to find the confirmation of that. There may be some indications that that may be coming. That transition will be January 1st of 2025. So in just a few short months, they're going to jump forward 3 code cycles from 2015 up to 2024 in the near future, but not today.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the poll here. All right, so the first question, it looks like the majority got that one correct, that public school projects within the state of Illinois follow which model energy code without amendments, and that is the 2015 International Energy Conservation Code. And then the second question there, so who determines school building code updates? It looks like the vast majority of everybody got this one correct, and that is the State Board of Education that determines the school building code updates. Results. All right, and then now we will continue the presentation with going into a few frequently asked questions. We're going to start with a couple questions that are more related to schools than not, and then I will pass it off to Ryan to handle some additional questions. So this first one here is just a really quick update. We just talked about this. So why don't public schools update codes regularly? The power to update the health life safety code for schools is delegated to the State Board of Education. As I just discussed, there is no mandated update cycle for that. So it is up to the State Board of Education. They have that 10-year mandated survey cycle, but no mandated update cycle. The update is at the determination of the State Board of Education or the regional superintendent if that power has been delegated to them. And then just another reminder that if you need to know which code applies, go ahead and look at Appendix A of the Health Life Safety Code, the Illinois administration document there for that table showing which building code applies based on the date of the design contract. So our next question here related to schools. So Chicago Public Schools is adding on to a school. Which code do they follow? Chicago Public Schools and charter schools within the city follow the 2022 Chicago Energy Transformation Code. So as I covered this a little while earlier, just a reminder that public schools within the state follow the 2015 ICC model codes, but any public school districts or charter schools within districts that are mandated by Article 34, municipalities that are over 500,000 population need to follow local codes. In the city of Chicago, local codes would be the 2022 Chicago Energy Transformation Code for your energy code. So covers a couple real quick just recaps just to make sure that these things stick in your mind. And then now I'm going to pass it off to Ryan to cover a few more frequently asked questions before we end the presentation today.
Thank you, Robert. So another question we often get is understanding how do we determine which code version a project needs to be on? And this goes back to what is the permit application date? And so again, this may depend on if you are, who that permit application goes to, depends on, are you working in a school or another building? So schools, as Robert mentioned, that's the regional office of education or the regional superintendent that is the code official, quote unquote, for the purposes of this. So they would receive the permit application. If it's for other projects, that goes to the local jurisdiction for that. So that's part of why we end up with this little odd thing is schools are under a separate jurisdiction from other buildings in the state of Illinois for that. So had some questions regarding type C lighting. So this is LEDs that use a driver. It's similar to a ballast, but not. So this is going in and I'm delamping and removing the ballast and I'm putting in a new LED and a driver. Is it does this have to meet the IECC? Likely it probably does not. And again, part of this goes back to, is a permit application required? If you don't have to have a permit application, then it doesn't fall under the IECC. We don't often find too many issues with that, given you're dramatically reducing the energy output anyway. But understanding which code, so if you do have to have a permit, which code applies. So if you're in public K-12 schools, then you're in 2015 IECC unamended. If you're in Chicago public schools or Chicago charter schools, then you're under Chicago Energy Transformation Code. Or if you're in another school, higher education, so those that are not under the school code, then that falls under the 2021 Illinois Energy Conservation Code at this time. We get a lot of questions regarding refrigerants. So understanding refrigerants have begun to be phased out in several locales. And part of this, very similar to what happened with R22 and R12. It wasn't banned, it's been phased out. So production is no longer allowed of it, but you can continue to reuse recovered refrigerants for theirs. So this continues to change which refrigerants are being phased out and where the new ones are. So there's a whole bunch of different refrigerants out there, and even now starting to hear about air being one of the new potential refrigerants out there. So there's been some new research out there demonstrating the feasibility of just air being used as a refrigerant. So, but yeah, so there's nothing that prohibits you from using refrigerants that are no longer able to be manufactured, but you can't be you can't be using, in essence, virgin refrigerant as it was no longer able to be produced. Can continue to use recovered for time to come. So this is where we get into a lot of nuance here and where the differences really make a big difference is roof insulation and curb heights. So understanding that there are many roofs out there that you look at that and say, okay, if I go to, the code is calling for R30 continuous insulation. If I do that, I'm going to have to raise equipment curbs, potentially parapet heights. How much insulation do I have to do? And so again, this will depend on which code version you're under. So part of this. So going through a couple of different examples. So under the 2021 Illinois Energy Conservation Code, there is an exception for curb heights. So documenting what is the most, without raising the curb heights and parapet walls, what is the most insulation that I can fit? And have I achieved the maximum I'm able to? That is considered allowable under the 2021 Illinois Energy Conservation Code. If you are under the Chicago Energy Transformation Code, they have a very similar provision for that. Again, making sure that you've provided the best insulation that you can. They even go as so far as to specify the minimum R value per inch. Generally, again, not a issue too often, but with that, this is where the big change happens is if you're under the 2015 IECC unamended, so you're in public K-12 education, they do not have an exception for this. So by the International Code Council's technical interpretation, the only exception for insulation requirements is a structural limitation. So you don't have to beef up the structure, but if you have to pick up HVAC equipment to raise the curb and you have to build up the parapet wall to fit that insulation, per the International Code Council's interpretation, that's required as part of a roof replacement project for that. So that is a major difference between these for that. Covered a little bit on this earlier as far as can communities adopt their own energy code? Yes, but the state provides a minimum standard on that. As far as fenestration, how do we handle that with no labels? This is where you can either go through a database of selected assemblies and pull out the correct one for site built, or they can be individually tested and listed for that. So both cases, you know, it's possible, but easier if they come right with an NFRC label. If the windows come with an NFRC label, don't take it off until it's been inspected. Also good to record that, and it's also supposed to be recorded on the building certificate for that. Touched briefly on this earlier as far as ag buildings. Again, this is going to depend on the local jurisdiction and if they require building permits for agriculture buildings or not. Again, some jurisdictions have said because we can't collect a fee, we're not going to require permits, or we're not going to require permits. Other jurisdictions have said, regardless of if we can collect a fee or not, it is the right thing to do to enforce a local building and safety code. So we're going to go ahead and have it enforced for that. So if the building is exempt from the other building codes, they are exempt from the energy code as well. So occasionally we'll get a question regarding federal efficiency standards, as the code calls out. You know, it needs to meet the minimum, federal efficiency requirements. Fortunately, in the International Energy Conservation Code, they have begun in the commercial provisions listing out what those minimum standards are. But given that this is the federal minimum standard for manufacturing and sale, generally you don't run into too many problems with this unless it is occurred due to a recent change. So there was a major change in equipment efficiency in January 1st of 2023. Probably most of that equipment, given the supply chain shortages, made it has already been installed. So anything manufactured since that would be manufactured to the new standards. So we generally don't find too many issues with efficiency requirements. Biggest problem we run into there is sizing, appropriate sizing and load calculations. You know, the equipment efficiency is not as big of a factor. So another one that we see common for schools, given that they are often single-story structures, is slab edge insulation and the ability to trade that off. Given that there is not a U factor in the table for slab edge insulation, it cannot be traded off for that. So we'll stick around. We do see a couple more questions, but we do want to remind everyone, if you do have questions after today, feel free to reach out to us, energycode@illinois.edu. On behalf of Robert and myself, I do appreciate everyone for joining us today and look forward to seeing you in the future. We'll answer a couple more questions that we've seen come up here. So yes, there's a question about energy efficient buildings versus public school projects. And yes, the Energy Efficient Buildings Act does not apply to the public school projects, as they are covered under their own specific administrative provisions for that.
That's essentially the same question, I think.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
similarly, question regarding stretch codes. So if a local jurisdiction adopts a stretch code, is the public school subject to that? And the answer would be no, because that is under the jurisdiction of the regional superintendent and not the local jurisdiction, unless you're in, I believe, City of Chicago would be exempted again, because again, since they are not under the school code, they're under the state code. So
Mhm.
as the school code is more specific, that's the one that goes with this.
Right. Well, Chicago schools are under the local codes, which
The
would be
local
the
codes,
Chicago
yes.
codes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we've answered all the questions. Again, if you think of one later on, feel free to reach out to us, energycode@illinois.edu. Uh,
Uh,
and with that,
Seeing
have
no
a
more
wonderful.
questions. Yeah.
Yep.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you.